It's one of the biggest questions humanity has pondered for centuries, a mystery that seems to hold an endless pull on our imagination. We all know that death is inevitable, yet when the moment comes, we find ourselves caught between the unknown and the unexplainable. No one can say for certain what happens to us after we take our last breath. But across time and cultures, ancient texts have offered clues, some comforting, some terrifying, that attempt to answer this very question. One of the most fascinating and mysterious texts to emerge from the heart of Tibetan Buddhism is the Bardo Thodol, also known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. While its name might sound cryptic or even ominous, the teachings inside this book have served as a profound guide for thousands of years, offering insight into the journey of the soul after death. The Bardo Thodol isn't just a story about death. It's a roadmap through the various stages of dying, the passage through realms, and the ultimate fate of the soul. But what makes this text so intriguing is its claim. It says that we all travel through these stages, whether we're aware of it or not. Death is not just an ending, it's a transition, a journey we must all take. In the Bardo Thodol, the moment of death marks the beginning of a process where the soul begins its separation from the body. It's said that this is when the individual experiences confusion and disorientation. Imagine being caught in a fog, unable to see clearly where you're going, unsure of who you are or what's real. This is the first stage of the Bardo, the intermediate state between life and death. The book describes the soul encountering a variety of visions, some peaceful and others terrifying. Bright lights, swirling clouds, divine beings, and even wrathful deities. These encounters aren't random. They reflect the state of mind of the deceased and are influenced by their past actions and spiritual readiness. The soul might be so overwhelmed by fear or attachment to the material world that it fails to recognize the light of enlightenment, and as a result, it may be forced to cycle back into another life, caught in the endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth. For those who have prepared spiritually, however, the Bardo Thodol offers a chance for liberation, an opportunity to break free from samsara and merge with the ultimate truth. But the Bardo Thodol isn't the only ancient text that explores the idea of life after death. For centuries, ancient Egyptians believed that death was the gateway to another existence. The Book of the Dead, written thousands of years ago, was intended as a guide for the soul's journey through the underworld, or duat. The deceased had to navigate through various trials, with the ultimate goal being to reach the field of reeds, a paradise where they would live in peace for eternity. But before that, the soul had to face judgment. It was weighed against Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. If the heart was found lighter than the feather of Ma'at, the soul would be granted eternal life. But if it was heavy with sin, the soul would be devoured by the monstrous Amit, forever lost to oblivion. Meanwhile, in the ancient Greek world, philosophers like Plato offered their own thoughts on the afterlife. For Plato, death wasn't an end, but a release, a freeing of the soul from the confines of the body. In Phaedo, he describes Socrates discussing how the body is like a prison for the soul, and death is the soul's chance to escape and return to the divine. According to this view, the soul is eternal, and death simply marks a transition from one state of existence to another. It's not something to fear, but a necessary step on the path to higher knowledge and enlightenment. Across cultures, there's a common thread in the ancient philosophies. Death is not a finality, but a transition. It's as though death is a veil, and when we pass through it, we step into another world, another state of being. For the ancient Egyptians, it was a journey to the afterlife, weighed and judged. For the Greeks, it was a release into the eternal realm of the soul. For the Buddhists, it's a passage through the Bardo, with the possibility of enlightenment or rebirth. And for the Hindus, death is just a phase in the never-ending cycle of samsara, a chance to reincarnate into another form. The idea that death is part of a larger cosmic cycle was also explored in the Hindu scriptures, like the Bhagavad Gita. Here, Krishna tells Arjuna that the soul is eternal, and never truly dies. It sheds its physical body like a worn-out garment and moves on to another. Death is simply a transition from one life to the next, and ultimately the goal is to escape this endless cycle, known as samsara, and achieve moksha, a state of liberation and union with the divine. This belief in the soul's immortality and its continual journey through life and death resonates with the ancient Greek idea of reincarnation. The philosopher Pythagoras, for instance, believed in the transmigration of souls, how after death the soul would move into a new body, either human or animal, depending on its past actions. Plato also shared a similar view, suggesting that the soul could be reborn multiple times, each time having the opportunity to grow and become wiser. In all of these ancient teachings, the journey of the soul after death is not something that happens by chance. It is shaped by one's actions, intentions, and spiritual practices. Death is not merely an end, but a transformation, a passage to another state of existence. Whether through the teachings of the Bardo Thodol, the Book of the Dead, the wisdom of Plato, or the spiritual beliefs of Hinduism, there is a shared understanding that death is not the final chapter in the story of the soul. Instead, it is one part of an ongoing journey, an eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, in which the soul learns, evolves, and ultimately seeks liberation. So, what happens when we die? From these ancient perspectives, death is not something to fear, but something to understand, to prepare for. It's a transition, a journey the soul must take. It may not be the end we imagine, but rather a gateway into something greater, something beyond our understanding, a continuation, a new beginning. In the end, perhaps the most important question isn't about what happens after we die, but how we live before we do. The way we live, the choices we make, and the spiritual wisdom we cultivate today will shape our experience when death finally comes knocking. Because according to these ancient traditions, it's not just where we go after we die that matters. It's who we become in the process, and in that sense, the journey to the other side is already happening here and now.